Although progressives often spoke of the importance of strengthening social bonds among urban society's diverse elements, racial segregation in the nation's cities was a product of the progressive era. Some reformers justified segregation as a modern solution to the race problem, a way of eliminating conflict between the races and protecting blacks from further violence, such as lynching. Segregation laws, known as Jim Crow laws, which legally separated people according to race, originated on Southern railroads in the mid-1880s. Southern whites grew especially resentful of middle-class blacks who purchased tickets in first-class cars and traveled with them as equals. In addition, when black men sat near unaccompanied white women in the parlor-like cars, white men grew especially anxious regarding the, quote, protection of their women, as they viewed all black men as potential rapists. As a result, Southern states passed legislation separating blacks and whites on railroad cars. Homer Plessy, with the support of the Citizens Committee to test the constitutionality of the separate car law, challenged Louisiana's 1890 law, which forced blacks to sit in a separate colored section all the way to the Supreme Court. Plessy's law argued that the Louisiana law, by denying Plessy equal protection under the law, violated the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. In Plessy v. Ferguson in 1896, the Supreme Court upheld segregation, ruling 7-1 that the law was, quote, reasonable, as it was consistent with local custom and helped preserve the public peace and good order. Segregation was constitutional, the court argued, as long as separate but equal facilities were provided, and the court gave its blessing to state-mandated segregation. The ruling constituted a massive setback for African Americans. Segregation by both legal statute and unwritten law soon spread to nearly every aspect of life in the South. Railroad waiting rooms, streetcars, public parks, movie theaters, employment, and even cemeteries were segregated. And though facilities were almost always segregated, they were seldom equal in the South, and segregation provided a daily reminder to African Americans of their, quote, inferior status. Southern progressives often justified segregation as an enlightened solution to the race problem, a middle way between the extremes of race war, which they deemed a threat as blacks and whites interacted in cities, and the outright expulsion of blacks. Whites attacked blacks with a new ferocity in the late 19th century, conjuring up frightening images of the, quote, black beast rapist, intent on ravishing white women to justify the lynching of thousands of black men. Lynchings, often public affairs in which black victims were often tortured and then hanged or shot, averaged more than 100 a year in the 1880s and 1890s. They particularly spiked in 1892, with 241 cases reported, 180 of them occurring in the South. Segregation, insisted Southern progressives, would protect blacks by reducing interracial contact. Alabama progressive Edgar Gardner Murphy, an Episcopal clergyman, insisted that the white South had a, quote, obligation to improve the black race, and could do so only by establishing a protective wall behind which blacks would be safe and given the chance to develop on their own. Northern white progressives did little to renounce Jim Crow in the South. In fact, they supported informal segregation in their own cities. Although 90% of African Americans still resided in the South in 1900, a black migration to the North was evident by the 20th century and accelerated during World War I with new employment opportunities. Even as most Northern schools remained integrated, organizations in some Northern cities, such as the YMCA, rejected black members. Hotels, restaurants, and department stores regularly refused service to blacks. Unable to purchase or rent homes in white residential areas, African Americans, regardless of class, found themselves relegated to black-only neighborhoods. Even some of the most open-minded progressives, such as Jane Addams, never managed to bridge the racial divide. Although Hull House opened its arms to European immigrants, Settlement House workers there made little effort to reach out to their black neighbors. One Hull House worker noted that when black women attended events at the Settlement House, they, quote, were not always received warmly, as the settlement seemed unwilling to come to grips with the Negro problem in its own environs, while willing to be concerned with the same problem elsewhere in the city. Segregation, however, did not improve race relations. Anti-black riots exploded in the nation's cities. In September 1906, for example, a 3-day riot erupted in Atlanta when a mob of armed white men, 10,000 strong, and fueled by rumors of a black man's assault of a white woman, terrorized the city's blacks. They targeted black businesses, attacking, killing, and torturing black men and women in their path, and leaving approximately 25 dead and dozens wounded. Such seething and vitriolic racism elicited a response by black intellectuals and social activists. Booker T. Washington rose to national prominence by advocating a strategy of economic development over political engagement to dampen the fires of race hatred. At the Atlanta Exposition in 1895, he delivered an address that would make him famous. He argued that agitation of questions of social equality is the extremist folly, and that African Americans prepare themselves for full-fledged citizenship and equality by finding a niche in the Southern economy through industrial education and enterprise to earn the respect of white people who would ultimately reward them with political rights. Other black leaders, such as W.E.B. Du Bois, criticized what he saw as Washington's accommodation to white supremacy, what he termed the Atlanta Compromise. The burden for Jim Crow lay not on the Negro's shoulders, Du Bois argued, but on the nation. Blacks needed to fight for the equality they were guaranteed in the aftermath of the Civil War. "The hands of none of us are clean," he wrote, "if we bend not our energies to righting these wrongs." As such, Du Bois helped found the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People in 1909. The NAACP investigated and publicized lynching, condemned the segregation of federal offices, and organized protests against the movie The Birth of a Nation. Ida B. Wells, a black clubwoman and later a founding member of the NAACP, spearheaded the attack on lynching. In 1887, she became an editor and part owner of the Free Speech, a small Memphis newspaper. When a mob lynched 3 black grocers in 1892, Wells came to the realization that lynching had nothing to do with the alleged rape of white women. Instead, it was a, quote, excuse to get rid of Negroes who were acquiring wealth and property and thus keep the race terrorized and keep the nigger down, end quote. For revealing this truth in her newspaper, Wells became the target of white violence, her newspaper offices and presses destroyed. She fled the South and settled in Chicago. Threatened with death should she ever return to Memphis, she continued her crusade against lynching and conducting detailed investigations. Wells then took her campaign abroad, where she lectured and created international alliances with London's anti-lynching committee. Wells's British lectures forced Memphis city leaders to condemn lynching when they began to worry that bad publicity might damage their cotton trade with Great Britain. Wells also worked tirelessly for other progressive causes, including women's suffrage. Despite the heroic efforts of Wells, Du Bois, and countless other black Americans, this period marked a low point for American race relations. In 1908, at one of the meetings of the Niagara Movement, a precursor to the NAACP, Du Bois noted this precipitous decline since Reconstruction. He wrote, "Once we were told, 'Be worthy and fit, and the ways are open.' Today, the avenues of advancement in the Army, Navy, and civil service, and even in business and professional life, are continually closed to black applicants of proven fitness, simply on the excuse of race and color."